Chapter 1. The baby was dying. Rowena knew it the moment she stepped through the door of the abandoned storage shed at the edge of Coldbrook Pack territory. She had followed the sound for nearly a mile through freezing rain, her boots soaked through, her healer's satchel clutched against her chest. She had told herself it was probably a stray cat, a fox kit, something small and frightened that she could quickly help and return from before anyone noticed she was gone. It was not a cat. The infant lay in a nest of burlap sacks in the corner of the shed, wrapped in a soaked piece of cloth that had once been a shirt. He was tiny, newborn or close to it. His lips were blue at the edges. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid bursts that Rowena recognized immediately as the early signs of cold shock. His eyes were closed, the lashes dark and damp against pale cheeks. One small fist was curled against his chin as if he were still trying to fight. Rowena dropped to her knees beside him without a second thought. "Hey," she whispered, pressing 2 fingers gently to the side of his neck. His pulse was there, faint, fast, but there. I've got you, little one." She worked quickly, stripping the wet cloth away, pulling dry bandaging from her satchel and wrapping him in layers, tucking him against the warmth of her own body beneath her cloak. She rubbed his back in slow, firm circles the way her grandmother had taught her, coaxing the blood back toward his core. She tipped a few drops of warming tonic between his lips, the kind she mixed herself from ginger root and honeyed wolfsbane extract, mild enough for infants, strong enough to matter. Well, he stirred. A faint, wavering cry escaped him, weak, barely a sound at all, but it was enough. Rowena exhaled, pressing her lips to the top of his head. "There you are." She looked around the shed then, searching for answers. There was no mother, no pack scent she recognized. Only the baby and the remains of a rough camp, a doused fire pit, a torn travel pack, and a smear of dark blood on the wooden floor near the door that made her stomach clench. Someone had been here. Someone had left in a hurry, or been taken. The baby had no scent mark on him. That was strange. Every pack pup was scent marked at birth by their alpha, a drop of alpha power pressed into the soft spot at the crown of the skull to identify the pup as belonging to a specific bloodline. It was tradition. It was protection. Well, it meant that any wolf who encountered the child would know immediately who it belonged to and who would come looking. This baby carried no such mark, which meant either his alpha didn't know he existed or someone had deliberately hidden him. Rowena looked down at the small face now pressing against the warmth of her chest, tiny fist uncurling slightly. Dark hair still damp. Strong jaw for someone so new to the world. And when his eyes cracked open for just a moment, the faintest amber glow flickered in his irises before fading. Pure alpha bloodline. She was certain of it. "You are going to cause me a great deal of trouble," she told him softly. He made a small sound that was almost content. She tucked him closer and stood. She needed to get him warm. She needed to get him fed. And then she needed to figure out who he belonged to, because whoever it was, they were going to want him back. She just had no idea yet what finding out would cost her. Chapter 2. Coldbrook Pack had never been particularly kind to Rowena Voss. She had grown up on its edges, the daughter of a healer mother who had died when Rowena was 12, leaving her with a cottage, a library of remedy books, and the quiet understanding that she would spend her life being useful rather than wanted. She was an Omega, low in the pack's hierarchy, which meant she was expected to keep her head down, serve when asked, and never make demands of her own. She had done all of that for 22 years. She had patched wounds and brewed tonics and delivered babies and asked for nothing. She had been quiet when she should have spoken, and spoken only when asked. She had learned how to make herself small. It had not made her safe. Alpha Draven stood at the head of the pack hall's long table when she arrived. The baby still bundled against her chest. He was a wide, heavy man with a gray-streaked beard and cold blue eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. Beside him sat Beta Zarek, who had never liked Rowena, and Pack Elder Leora, who had liked her once, but had grown distant in recent years as Draven's grip on Coldbrook tightened. 6 other senior wolves filled the remaining seats. All of them stared at the bundle in her arms. "I found him on the eastern border," Rowena said, keeping her voice level. "Though abandoned in the old storage shed near the creek. He was in cold shock when I reached him. He's stable now, but he needs proper feeding and warmth, and someone needs to identify who he belongs to." Silence. Then Draven leaned forward, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "No pack mark," he said. "No," Rowena confirmed, "but his bloodline reads strong alpha. I think he may belong to someone outside Coldbrook." Draven's eyes narrowed. "Where exactly did you find him?" "The eastern shed, just inside our border." "Just inside." He repeated it slowly, as if testing the words for something rotten. "Which means he was left on Coldbrook land, which means whatever trouble follows him." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Lands on us." Rowena frowned. "He's a baby, Alpha Draven. Whatever trouble he carries. Yeah, he didn't choose it." "That's not how borders work, Rowena." Beta Zarek spoke without looking up from the table, his voice flat and dismissive. "An unmarked pup found on our land is either a threat or a liability. Either way, we don't want it." Something tightened in Rowena's chest. "You can't be serious." "Leave him at the border crossing," Draven said, as if the matter was already settled. "Flag it to the Northern Registry. They'll process him." The Northern Registry. Rowena knew what that meant. Unmarked pups sent to the registry disappeared into a system so overwhelmed and underfunded that most of them never came out the other side with a family. They aged out of the infant wards into group homes, and then into nothing. "He could die before the registry responds," she said. "It's been below freezing for a week. He was already in cold shock when I found him." "Then perhaps," Zarek said, finally looking up, his eyes flat and unkind, "he was not meant to survive." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Several wolves shifted uncomfortably. Elder Leora looked down at the table. No one spoke. Rowena looked at each face around that table, looked at the pack she had served since she was 12 years old, the pack she had stitched back together, one wound at a time, asking for nothing. "I'll keep him," she said quietly. "I'll care for him while we find out who he belongs to. He won't be Coldbrook's burden. He'll be mine." Draven studied her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite cruelty. Something more careful than that, more calculated. "If you take responsibility for him," he said slowly, "and it turns out he does bring trouble to this pack, the consequence falls on you." "Understood." He nodded once. "Then take him and go." Rowena turned and walked out of the pack hall with her spine straight and her arms wrapped around a baby who had no idea how close he had just come to being discarded like something broken. She did not look back. She did not let herself shake until she was safely inside her cottage with the door latched. Then she sat on the floor beside the hearth with the baby in her lap and let herself breathe. "All right," she whispered to him. "It's just us for now, but I'm going to find out who you are. I promise." He blinked at her with those faint amber eyes. She got to work. Chapter 3. 7 weeks passed. Rowena named him Valor because he was small and stubborn and seemed entirely unaware of how much difficulty he had caused. He ate every 3 hours with focused determination. He slept in the carved wooden cradle Rowena dragged in from the storage room, the one her mother had used for the babies she'd delivered over the years. He made a sound like a disgruntled cat when he was unhappy, and a sound like small bells when something amused him. He was, without question, the most alpha-natured infant Rowena had ever encountered. He didn't cry when she changed his wrappings. He stared at her with those serious amber eyes, as if he was filing information away for later. When she sang the old healing songs her mother had taught her, he went absolutely still and listened with the focused attention of someone much older and much larger. When the pack dogs howled outside at night, he made a sound back at them, low and determined, that made the dogs go quiet. He was also growing at twice the normal rate. His arms and legs were filling out fast, his grip was strong enough to bruise, and 3 times Rowena had caught what she was almost certain was a faint glow around his hands while he slept. Pure alpha blood, burning brighter with every passing day. She sent inquiries through the Northern Registry. She sent word to 3 neighboring packs. She contacted the Regional Wolf Council's records office and requested a search of alpha bloodlines against the infant's physical description. No one responded. She tried not to think about what that meant. In the meantime, her troubles with Coldbrook grew quietly worse. Yet pack members who had once nodded to her in the market now crossed the street. 2 families she'd been treating for recurring illness suddenly started using the pack's other healer, an older woman named Izaria, who charged twice as much and was half as skilled. Beta Zarek stopped including her in the monthly pack health meetings. She was being edged out, slowly, carefully, in a way that would look like nothing to anyone watching from outside. She understood. Draven had made a decision the night she walked out of that pack hall with Valor. He had decided she was more trouble than she was worth, and he was simply waiting for the right moment to make it official. She was running out of time. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning in the 7th week, 2 things happened at once. The first was that a response finally came from the Regional Wolf Council. Not a letter, a messenger dressed in road-dusted riding gear, who knocked on her door before dawn and handed her a sealed envelope with a crest she recognized immediately. The high gold sigil of the King's Administrative Office. She stared at it with her heart hammering before breaking the seal. The letter inside was short. It said, "The infant matching the description in your inquiry may be connected to an ongoing investigation at the highest level of pack governance. Please maintain the safety and privacy of the infant. A representative will arrive within 5 days to assess the situation. Do not, under any circumstances, share this information with the local pack leadership until the representative has arrived." It was signed with only initials. RV, the senior investigator, King's Counsel. Rowena read it 3 times. Then she looked at Valor, who was lying on his back on her kitchen table batting at a hanging bundle of dried herbs with focused determination. "You are going to cause me an enormous amount of trouble," she told him again. He grabbed the dried sage and pulled it down with a triumphant grunt. The second thing that happened that morning was that Alpha Draven called a pack meeting, and Rowena was specifically requested to attend. Chapter 4. The pack hall was full. Every senior wolf, every pack family head, every Coldbrook member over the age of 16 was seated or standing along the walls. That alone told Rowena this was not an ordinary meeting. Draven did not gather the whole pack unless he intended to make a statement. Something that needed witnesses. something that needed to feel unanimous. She walked in with Valor in his carry sling against her chest and felt the weight of 60 pairs of eyes land on her. Threwn didn't waste time. "Rowena Voss," he said, standing at the head of the room, his alpha authority rolling out in a low wave that made the air feel thick. 7 weeks ago, you brought an unmarked foreign infant onto Coldbrook land and claimed personal responsibility for him. I allowed it on the condition that his presence caused no trouble for this pack. Rowena kept her voice steady. He hasn't caused any trouble. That depends, Threwn said, on your definition of trouble. He nodded once toward the back of the room. The 2 wolves she didn't recognize stepped forward. They wore dark traveling gear and carried themselves with the particular controlled stillness of trained enforcers. One of them placed a document on the long table. Even from where she stood, Rowena could see the official seal on it. "We received a visit yesterday," Threwn said, "from representatives of the Blackthorn Pack. They are searching for a missing infant believed to have been taken across the northern border 7 weeks ago." He paused. "They believe the infant may be in the possession of a Coldbrook Omega who interfered with a legitimate pack matter." The room was very quiet. Rowena looked at the 2 strangers. Their scents were unfamiliar, and something about the controlled blankness of their faces made the hair on the back of her neck rise. "I found an abandoned baby in a shed," she said clearly, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "There was no one else present. There was blood on the floor and the signs of a hasty departure. That is not a pack matter. That is an abandoned infant." "Blackthorn claims differently," Zarek said from his seat, watching her with that flat, calculating expression. "They say the infant's mother was in the process of being returned to the pack when she went into early labor, that the infant was left in the shed temporarily while pack members went for assistance, and that when they returned, both the mother and the baby were gone." Every part of that story felt wrong to Rowena in a way she could not fully articulate. The blood on the floor, the doused fire, the panic-scattered evidence of flight rather than a planned temporary absence. A mother who had just given birth didn't simply wander off. "Where is the mother now?" she asked. A brief pause. The 2 strangers exchanged a look. "Recovering," one of them said, "under pack care." "I'd like to speak with her." "That," Threwn said, "is not your place." Rowena looked down at Valor. He was watching the room with those serious amber eyes, one fist pressed against the fabric of the sling. Still, alert, not frightened. She thought about the letter in her cottage. 5 days. The king's representative would arrive in 5 days. She just needed to get through 5 days. "I understand Blackthorn's concern," she said carefully. "But I received a communication this morning from the Regional Wolf Council suggesting that the infant situation may be under investigation at a higher level. Well, I think it would be wise to wait for clarification before—" "Enough!" Threwn's voice cut across her like a blade. The room went still. "Rowena Voss." He let her name sit in the air for a moment, heavy with what was coming. "You were given a conditional allowance, and you have now become a source of dispute between this pack and our neighbors. You have refused a direct instruction from your alpha. You have introduced outside interference into a pack matter." He straightened. "By Coldbrook law, these actions constitute a breach of pack loyalty. I am exercising my right as alpha to revoke your pack standing." The words landed like a physical blow. Revoke your pack standing. It meant exile. It meant losing the protection of the territory. It meant she would be a lone Omega in a world that was not safe for lone Omegas. Rowena heard the murmur move through the room, saw a few faces flinch. Elder Leora pressed her lips together and looked at the table. A woman near the back with 3 young children gripped her eldest shoulder and turned her face away. No one spoke up. Not one person in that room full of people she had spent a decade helping spoke a single word in her defense. Something broke open quietly in Rowena's chest. Not dramatically, just a soft, tired tearing, the way old fabric finally gives out after too many washes. She had always known this was how Coldbrook really felt about her. She had chosen not to think about it too clearly. Now she had no choice. She looked at Threwn. When? You have until sundown to gather what you need and leave the territory. She nodded once. Didn't argue. Didn't cry. She pressed her hand lightly over Valor's back through the sling, feeling the warm, steady weight of him. Just to be clear, she said quietly, are you also handing the baby to Blackthorn? Threwn hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But she caught it. The infant will be transferred to Blackthorn representatives tomorrow morning. She looked at the 2 strangers. The one on the left had his eyes fixed on Valor with an expression she did not like at all. Then I'll take my leave, she said, and walked out. She was halfway home, moving fast through the trees, when she realized that she was not going to hand Valor over. Not to those men. Not tomorrow. Not ever. She had 5 days until the king's representative arrived. She had until sundown to leave Coldbrook, and she had no idea where she was going or what she was walking into. But she had a baby with amber alpha eyes who had survived cold shock and abandonment and a pack that wanted to use him, and she was not going to be the one who handed him to people who made her skin crawl. She started packing the moment she got through her door. Chapter 5. She took what mattered, her medicine satchel fully stocked, 3 changes of clothes, her mother's healing journals, the envelope from the King's Council, enough preserved food for a week, Valor's blankets, his tonic, his carved wooden rattle, and the small knitted hat she'd made him from the softest wool she could find. She left before the sun went down, several hours early, just in case. The road north was the only road that made sense. Coldbrook sat in the southern Highland Territory. North meant the King's Road, the main artery that connected all the major packed territories to the Central Governance Hall, where the Alpha King held court. If the King's representative was coming from there, she would be moving toward them rather than away. She walked through the first night. Valor slept in the sling, warm against her chest, completely unbothered by the fact that they were homeless. She envied him that. By morning, she had covered 12 miles, and her feet were aching, and she was starting to think seriously about what her next step actually was. She found a traveler's inn at a crossroads village just after dawn, paid for a room and a meal with the modest savings she'd brought, and sat at a corner table nursing hot tea while Valor ate and watched the room with those watchful eyes. She pulled out the King's Council letter and read it again. A representative will arrive within 5 days. They had been coming to Coldbrook. She was no longer at Coldbrook, which meant she needed to get word to them about where she was, and she needed to do it without alerting Threwn or the Blackthorn men, who she was now fairly certain were not legitimate pack representatives at all. Something about their story had been wrong. Not just wrong in the way people's stories were sometimes carelessly wrong. Wrong in the specific, careful way of a rehearsed lie. She thought about the blood on the shed floor. She thought about the terror that had been in the camp's scattered remains. She thought about a new mother, hours after childbirth, desperate enough to leave her baby behind rather than let whoever was chasing her find him. She thought about the way the Blackthorn man's eyes had fixed on Valor. And she thought about Valor's bloodline. Pure alpha. The kind of bloodline that only emerged in the direct line of the highest-ranked packs. The kind that, in the wrong hands, could be used as a political pawn for decades. "Who are you, really?" she murmured to him. He grabbed her finger and held on. She needed to get to the King's Road. She needed to find the representative before anyone else found her. She left the inn within the hour. She was 3 miles up the road, the morning sun barely cutting through the cloud cover, when she heard horses. Fast ones, coming from the south. She stepped off the road immediately, moving into the tree line, pressing back against the thick trunk of an oak. She tucked Valor tighter, reaching into her satchel for the small silencing drop she used for infants during difficult procedures. 1 drop on the gum line, and they stayed drowsy and quiet for an hour. Safe, non-harmful. She had used it dozens of times. She hesitated with the small vial in her hand. Valor looked up at her. Then he did something extraordinary. He went completely, deliberately quiet. Not the quiet of sleep. The focused, intentional quiet of someone who understood that silence was necessary. His eyes stayed open, clear and watchful. But not a sound came from him. Rowena stared at him. The horses passed on the road. 4 riders, dark gear. No pack insignia she could see, but the scent that drifted through the trees as they went made her wolf instincts surge with alarm. These were trained hunters, and they were tracking something. She pressed flatter against the oak and waited until the sound faded completely. Then she looked down at Valor again. "You understand me," she whispered. "Don't you?" He made the small sound like bells. Just once. Then went still again. Rowena tucked the vial away and kept moving through the trees, parallel to the road but hidden from it. Her mind was working fast and cold, the way it did in emergencies, stripping out everything except what was essential. Facts. Someone was hunting them. The Blackthorn men were not who they claimed to be. The King's Council knew something. Valor was far more important than anyone at Coldbrook had guessed. And she was a lone Omega on a frozen road with no pack protection, a baby, and a 3-day walk to the nearest major post station. She needed help. And she needed it from someone who had both the authority and the will to give it. She needed to find the King's representative. Or, she thought, as the cold wind cut through the trees and she tightened her cloak around Valor, what if she found the King himself? Chapter 6. She found him, as it turned out, before she found anyone else. Or rather, he found her. It was the second evening. She had avoided the road for most of the day, moving through the woodland parallel to it, and she was exhausted and cold, and Valor had been awake and restless for 2 hours. She had stopped in a small clearing to feed him and rest her arms, and was sitting on a fallen log back to a tree, when a twig snapped 10 feet to her left. She was on her feet in an instant. Valor tucked tight in her arms, body placed between him and the sound. "Easy." The voice was low and calm, not aggressive, but carrying the kind of quiet authority that came not from volume, but from certainty. "I'm not one of the ones following you." A man stepped from the trees. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, dressed in plain, dark traveling clothes with no insignia. But even the plain clothes had the unmistakable quality of someone who did not think much about what things cost. His hair was dark, slightly disordered from travel. His jaw was sharp. His eyes, when they caught the fading light, were a clear and startling gray. He stopped at a respectful distance and held both hands slightly away from his sides. The gesture of someone experienced at approaching frightened creatures without triggering flight. "You're Rowena Voss," he said. Not a question. She kept her body between him and Valor. "That depends on who's asking." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Brief, quickly controlled. "My name is Evander. I work for the King's Council. I've been trying to find you since this morning." He paused. "Coldbrook told my representative that you were exiled. The Blackthorn men got there first and caused some confusion." Rowena studied him. "You have identification?" He reached slowly into his coat and produced a sealed card, the kind that couldn't be forged because it carried actual Alpha authority pressed into the seal, something you felt in your bones when you touched it. The low vibration of power that was unmistakably real. She crossed the clearing and took it from him. The seal burned warm and genuine against her palm. R.V. Senior Investigator, King's Council. And below that, a second name, the one that actually mattered on an authorization card. The name that gave an investigator the authority to move. A name she recognized. Alpha King Evander Voss Aaron. She looked up sharply. The man was watching her with that same controlled expression. But something had shifted in his gray eyes. Something that was not quite calm. Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. "Voss Aaron," she said slowly. "My full name, yes." Her eyes dropped to Valor, to the dark hair and the strong jaw and the amber eyes that were watching the man across the clearing with absolute focused attention. Then she looked back at the man. The jaw! The same jaw, scaled down to something very small and very new. "You're the Alpha King," she said. "Yes, and Valor," her voice stalled, "is my son." The words came out quiet and controlled, but she could hear what was underneath them. The thing that had been tearing at him for 7 weeks. He kept his eyes on the baby in her arms, and whatever he was feeling was large enough that he couldn't entirely keep it off his face. His mother was under my protection. She was being transported safely out of a territory dispute when the convoy was attacked. She went into labor early and was separated from her escorts. I have been looking for both of them since the night it happened. Rowena's throat tightened. "His mother is alive," he said quickly. "Injured, but alive. And she's being cared for at the Central Hall. She doesn't know where the baby is. That has been—" He stopped, pressed his jaw shut, breathed once through his nose. "That has been very hard for her." Rowena looked down at Valor. Valor was still watching the man across the clearing with that focused, ancient-feeling gaze. Then, slowly, Valor lifted one small hand, reached in the direction of the tall man with the gray eyes. The Alpha King took 2 steps forward before he could stop himself, then caught himself, going still, hands flexing at his sides. "May I?" His voice was rough. Rowena crossed the clearing and placed Valor carefully into his arms. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no thunder or light. Just a very large man receiving a very small baby with hands that were not quite steady, folding him against his chest with the kind of careful ferocity of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and was now, finally, less afraid. Valor reached up and grabbed a fistful of the man's collar and held on with that strong, determined grip. Evander Voss Aaron, Alpha King, pressed his lips to the top of his son's head and closed his eyes and breathed. Rowena looked away into the trees. Gave them a moment. When she looked back, the king's eyes were open again, clear and gray and focused on her with an expression that had shifted into something sharp and assessing. "The Blackthorn men," he said, "tell me everything." Chapter 7. They sat on opposite sides of the fallen log in the clearing while the last light faded from the sky. Valor fell asleep against the king's chest with the immediate trust of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. Evander held him with one arm and listened with his full attention as Rowena told him everything. She was precise. She didn't embellish or minimize. She gave him facts in order. The shed, the blood, Valor's condition, the pack meeting, the Blackthorn men's arrival, the story they had told, and the particular wrongness she had felt in it. The letter from the council. The decision to run instead of hand Valor over. When she finished, the clearing was quiet except for the sound of the wind in the high branches. The Blackthorn men are not from Blackthorn, Evander said. Blackthorn is allied with my council. They would have contacted me directly, not gone to a small pack through unofficial channels. He paused. They work for someone who wants my son and doesn't want me to know they have him. Who? He was quiet for a moment. There's a faction within the Upper Pack Council that has been trying to force a political arrangement I've refused. A bonding arrangement that would tie my bloodline to their families. His voice was flat, not quite cold, just stating fact. If they had my son, they would have leverage they currently don't. Rowena thought about the way the man's eyes had fixed on Valor in the pack hall. Not with the look of someone searching for a lost child, with the look of someone assessing an asset. They'd have come for him tonight, she said. Yes. Evander looked at the sleeping baby on his chest. You got him out before they could. Coldbrook threw me out for it. Something shifted in his jaw. I know. I intend to address that. You don't have to. He looked at her directly then. The king's gaze had a quality she was not used to, full attention, complete and unfiltered, with none of the practiced looking past that most powerful people used on Omegas. He looked at her the way he had listened to her, as if what she said mattered exactly as much as what anyone else would say. You kept my son alive for 7 weeks, he said. Alone, with no pack support and no resources beyond your own skill. You refused to hand him over when you could have made your own situation much easier by doing so. And you ran when you knew they were coming, rather than waiting to see if it would be fine. He paused. It would not have been fine. Rowena looked down at her hands. He was a baby who needed help, that's all. That, he said quietly, is not all. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, which seemed to be the right choice because he nodded once, as if she had confirmed something, and turned his attention back to the trees. I have 4 of my own guard a mile up the road, he said. I came ahead when we picked up your trail because I thought it would be better to approach alone. He glanced at her. I was right. I'd have bolted if a party of armed guards came through the trees. Yes. That almost smile again. They sat in silence for a moment, comfortable, strangely, for 2 people who had met less than an hour ago. What happens now? She asked. We reached the central hall. My son is reunited with his mother. The false Blackthorn operatives are identified and their employer is dealt with. He paused. And you are given whatever you need. A new territory. Pack standing with a pack of your choosing. Resources. Whatever Coldbrook took from you in exchange for doing what was right. Rowena shook her head slowly. I don't need a reward. It's not a reward, he said. It's a correction. There's a difference. She looked at him sideways. Do you always talk like that? He blinked, as if slightly surprised by the question. Like what? Like everything is a policy decision. A pause. Then, for the first time, Something that was actually a real smile moved across his face. Brief, self-aware, slightly reluctant, as if he hadn't intended to let it happen. "My counsel would say yes," he admitted. "That's not generally considered a compliment." "It wasn't an insult either," she said. "Just an observation." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. We should move," he said. "The men tracking you will circle back by nightfall." She stood, reaching for Valor. He transferred the baby back to her without being asked, but his hands lingered for a second in the exchange, warm and deliberate. "Thank you," he said, quietly. Just those 2 words, but the weight in them was significant enough that it settled in her chest and stayed there. She tucked Valor back into the sling and followed the king through the dark trees toward the road. Chapter 8. The threat closes in the 4 king's guards were exactly what Rowena expected. Large, quiet, professional, and unsettled by the sight of her carrying their king's infant son through the woods like she'd been doing it for weeks. Which she had been. They moved north in a tight group. Evander rode at the front with 2 guards. Rowena rode behind with a guard on each side, Valor secure in the sling, a borrowed cloak around both of them against the cold. She watched the king handle the logistics of the journey with brisk efficiency. Orders given quietly and acted on immediately. Routes adjusted on the fly. Communication maintained with scouts ahead through short whistled signals she suspected she would need years of training to decode. He was not what she had expected. She had expected authority to feel like Alpha Draven's authority, heavy and self-satisfied, designed to remind everyone around it of their place. Evander's authority felt different. It was present, real. But it wasn't being used on the people around him. It was being used at the problem. She was 4 miles into thinking about this when the first attack came. An arrow from the left tree line, not aimed at Evander, aimed at her. The guard on her left deflected it with an armored forearm, and suddenly everyone was moving. Evander wheeled his horse and was beside her in seconds, body angled between her and the trees, cloak thrown back. His eyes blazed amber, wolf close to the surface. "How many?" he asked his guards. "6 at least," the lead guard said. "Spread through the eastern side." "They're after the baby," Rowena said, steady despite her hammering pulse. She pressed her hand over Valor, who had gone still and quiet the same way he had in the trees the previous day. "They don't want to hit him, but they'll go through me to get him." Evander's jaw tightened. He looked at the guard on Rowena's right. "Hendricks, ye take her and go. Northern path, direct to the 2nd way station. Don't stop." Then to Rowena, "Hold on. What about—" "I'll be fine." His gray eyes met hers briefly, something steady in them. "Go." Before she could argue, Hendricks urged her horse forward, and they were moving fast into the darkness, hooves pounding the frozen earth, trees blurring on either side. Behind her, she heard the sounds of a fight, the clash and snarl of wolves meeting wolves. Evander's voice cutting through it, clear and commanding. She held Valor and rode and did not look back. It took 40 minutes to reach the way station, a fortified stop house used by King's Council travelers. Hendricks got her inside, bolted the door, and had her and Valor installed by the fire with hot water and blankets before sending a signal back down the road. Rowena sat on the bench by the fire with Valor in her lap and waited. She was good at waiting. She had spent her whole life waiting for pack approval that never quite came, for safety that was always slightly out of reach, for the quiet life that she had earned and been denied. She was very practiced at sitting still in the middle of uncertainty and not flying apart. Valor reached up and patted her face with one small hand, his version of comfort. I'm fine, she told him. He made the bell sound. 40 minutes after that, the door opened. Evander came through it with his guards, a cut on his cheekbone, and his traveling coat torn along one arm. He was already moving, eyes finding her across the room immediately, taking inventory, confirming she was unharmed. She felt the weight of that look differently than she expected to. You're hurt, she said, standing. It's minor. He crossed the room, looking at Valor. He's all right. He's fine. She paused. Sit down and let me look at your face. He stopped, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sit, she said again, in the tone she used on difficult patients. He sat. She cleaned the cut with steady hands, applied salve from her satchel, and bandaged it with the efficient motions of someone who had done this several thousand times. He was still throughout, watching her face while she worked, which was mildly distracting, but she ignored it. The attackers? She asked. Dealt with. 2 were captured and are already talking. His voice was very controlled. The faction is larger than I thought. They've been moving against me for months, using Blackthorn's name without permission to cover their actions. What will you do? What I always do. Address it directly and make very clear that there are consequences for threatening what belongs to me. His eyes moved to Valor, in her arms again, and then back to her, and the sentence hung in the air for a moment, with the odd feeling of referring to more than one thing. Rowena tied off the bandage. That'll need to be kept clean for 3 days. You say that the way you expect to be there to make sure it happens. She looked up. He was watching her with that direct, unguarded look again. I was going to ask, she said carefully, if the offer still stands, the new territory, the pack placement. It stands. A pause. Though I should tell you that there's another option. What option? He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the guards moved quietly, doing their work, giving them the strange, private space of being surrounded by people who had decided not to look. My son knows your voice, he said. He knows your scent. He's spent the first weeks of his life with you as his primary care. Moving him to a new handler, even to his mother, will take time and care. He looked at Valor, then back at her. I'm not suggesting anything unreasonable. Just that perhaps the simplest thing, the kindest thing for him, would be for you to remain close. For a time. Close, she repeated. At the Central Hall. As part of his care. A formal role, well compensated, with full pack protections. He paused. You'd be working directly with me, and his mother. Assuming that arrangement is acceptable to all parties. Rowena looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to wrap a practical reason around it, she said quietly. Something shifted in his face. No, he agreed after a beat. I don't. The fire popped. Valor made the bell sound between them. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded once, as if that was a perfectly reasonable answer, as if he was entirely prepared to wait for it. She suspected this was going to be the most complicated thing that had ever happened to her. Chapter 9. The Central Governance Hall sat at the top of a long rise, stone and timber and warmth, banners flying in the morning wind. It was larger than anything Rowena had ever seen. The kind of place that made her small healer's cottage feel like something from another world. She arrived with Evander's party just after dawn. Guards stood aside, doors opened, and from across the wide front courtyard, a young woman came running. She was small and dark-haired, and moving with the particular reckless speed of someone who had been waiting too long to be restrained by dignity. Her arms were in front of her before she reached them. Her eyes were locked on the bundle in Rowena's arms, with an expression of such naked, desperate relief that Rowena's throat closed. She held out Vylor. The young woman took him and folded him against her chest and pressed her whole face into his hair and made a sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite a word, just a sound, the kind that comes from somewhere too deep for language. Rowena stepped back. She felt a hand at her elbow, light, steadying. Evander had moved beside her without her noticing, and he was not looking at the reunion. He was looking at her face. His hand on her arm was exactly as firm as it needed to be, and no more. "All right?" he said quietly. She realized her cheeks were wet. "Fine," she said, slightly embarrassed. She stopped. "You've been his entire world for 7 weeks," he said. "It's all right to feel that." She nodded, let herself breathe for a moment. Let the ache of handing him over settle into something that was sad, but also, underneath, the right kind of sad. The kind that came from love that had done its job. Then the young woman looked up from Valor's hair, eyes bright and fierce. She looked at Rowena. "You kept him safe," she said. "He helped," Rowena said honestly. "He's quite capable for his age." The young woman let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is exactly like his father." Evander made a sound at Rowena's side that she suspected, in a less formal context, would have been a deeply undignified laugh. The reckoning, as Evander had called it, came that afternoon. The 5 council members connected to the faction were brought before the full governing council in the hall's main chamber. Rowena was asked to give testimony. She did, clearly and without drama, the same way she had told Evander in the clearing. Facts in order. What she had seen, what she had understood, what she had chosen to do. The council listened. It was different from the Coldbrook Pack meeting. The faces around this table were not calculating how to make her small. They were listening to what she said and treating it as information rather than inconvenience. She didn't realize how much she had needed that until it happened. The 5 were stripped of council positions. 3 faced further investigation. The 2 who had posed as Blackthorn representatives and led the hunting party were removed from the hall in the kind of formal disgrace that would follow them for the rest of their lives. And then, at the end, Evander stood. "There is one additional matter," he said. He looked at Rowena. She had not been told about this part. Coldbrook Pack, under Alpha Draven's leadership, exiled a healer who had done nothing except save an infant, refused to hand him to people who wanted to harm him, and protect a member of the king's bloodline at significant personal cost. His voice was even, careful, but the weight behind it moved through the room like weather. "This action will be reviewed by the Regional Wolf Council. Draven will answer for it, and Rowena Voss will be offered full reinstatement to pack standing with compensation for the weeks she spent without pack protection due to Coldbrook's failure." A murmur moved through the assembled council. Rowena kept her expression neutral through what felt like a significant internal storm. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Evander fell into step beside her. "You could have told me about that," she said. "You might have asked me not to do it." She looked at him sideways. "And?" "And it needed to be done regardless." A beat. "But I thought you might be less comfortable if you knew ahead of time." "Oh, you have a habit of deflecting things meant to help you." She stopped walking. He stopped walking. "That is a very accurate observation," she said, "for someone I met 3 days ago." He considered this. "I'm a reasonably good observer." "You're a deeply inconvenient observer," she corrected. That genuine smile again. Less restrained this time. It made a significant change to his face, she noticed. Softened the sharpness of it. made him look less like someone managing a situation and more like someone actually present in one. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you authorized the investigation from the council, you signed the letter with just your initials, RV. What does the R stand for?" A pause. Something slightly complicated moved across his face. "Evander is my middle name," he said. "My given name is Rowan. I stopped using it when I took the Alpha position because it's also my father's name, and we have—" He paused. "A complicated relationship." Rowena looked at him. "That's the most personal thing you've said to me." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She held out her hand, the way people did when they were starting something, not ending it. "Rowena Voss," she said. "Healer, formerly of Coldbrook, currently undecided about most things." He looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. "Rowan Evander Voss Aaron," he said. "Alpha King, apparently also undecided about several things." A pause. "That is the first time I've said my full name aloud in 7 years. How was it?" He thought about it seriously. "Better than I expected." Chapter 10. She stayed. Not because he asked her to, though he did ask once, carefully, with the same directness he used for everything and none of the pressure of someone who expected a particular answer. She stayed because it turned out the central hall had more need of a skilled healer than she had anticipated, and because Valor's transition to his mother's care went exactly the way Evander had predicted it would. Gradually, gently, with Rowena present enough that the baby didn't feel abandoned and absent enough that the bond between mother and son had space to grow. She stayed because Mirabelle, Valor's mother, was kind and sharp and asked Rowena genuine questions about her life and then actually listened to the answers. Turned out Mirabelle was a trained archivist from the Eastern Territories, not a pack wolf at all. And she found pack hierarchy as baffling and frustrating as Rowena secretly did, and the two of them had a series of conversations over late-night feeding sessions that Rowena hadn't known she needed. She stayed because the Central Hall's library had 300 years of healing journals, and she was never quite ready to stop reading them. And she stayed because of the evenings. There was a courtyard at the back of the hall that caught the last of the day's light from a particular angle, and she had started taking her tea there in the late afternoon, and somewhere in the second week, Evander had started appearing there too, on no particular schedule, with no particular explanation, just appearing and sitting on the opposite bench and working through his papers or reading, or simply sitting while the light changed. They talked. No, or they didn't talk, which was equally comfortable. He told her about the governance disputes that kept him awake at night, the complicated business of holding a kingdom of independent-minded packs together, the way every decision made 10 other decisions harder. She told him about growing up on Coldbrook's edges, about her mother, about the particular loneliness of being useful to people who didn't think of you as a person. He listened the same way he had in the clearing. Complete attention, no performance. She found, slowly, that she had stopped waiting for him to decide she was too much trouble. He found, she suspected, that he had stopped managing the conversation from behind glass. In the 5th week, he found her in the library late in the evening and stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him. "I have something to tell you," he said. She set down her journal. "All right." He came and sat across from her, which was not his usual move. He usually stood in doorways or positioned himself at a slight angle, the posture of someone maintaining the option to leave. Sitting directly across was different. "Coldbrook's review came back," he said. "Draven resigned his Alpha position rather than face the full council investigation. Elder Leora has been named interim Alpha pending a pack vote." Rowena exhaled slowly. How is the pack taking it? Better than expected, from what I hear. Leora has already reached out to 3 Omegas who were exiled under Draven's leadership. A pause. Including you. She's asked whether you might consider returning. Rowena was quiet for a moment. 7 weeks ago, that the idea of going back to Coldbrook would have felt like the only right answer. The pack she had grown up in, the home she had made, the life she understood. Now she looked at the library around her, at the 300 years of healing journals, at the courtyard just outside where the evening light did something extraordinary, at the doorway through which a complicated, careful man had just walked to tell her something she mattered enough to be told. "What would you want?" Evander asked. Not pressing, just asking, with the same directness as always. "I think," she said slowly, "that Leora is a good choice for Coldbrook, and I think some of the Omegas she's reached out to will go back, and it will be better than it was." She looked at her hands. "I'm not sure that's the same as it being where I belong anymore." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was choosing words carefully. "I've been trying to find a reasonable way to say something," he said, "for approximately 2 weeks. She looked up. His gray eyes were on her with that complete, unguarded directness. "I don't think there is a reasonable way," he continued. "So I'm going to say it plainly. I want you to stay. Not as a healer, though you are exceptional at it. Not as my son's caregiver, though Valor is very clearly still attached to you, in a way that is frankly slightly embarrassing, given that he barely tolerates most adults." A pause. "I want you to stay because I have not had a single evening in this hall in 7 years that I was genuinely glad to be present for until the last 5 weeks. And that seems like information worth sharing." The library was very quiet. "That," she said carefully, "is the least policy-sounding thing you've ever said." The smile, full this time, unrestrained. "I've been practicing," he said. She stood up, crossed the small space between the chairs, and sat beside him rather than across from him. Close enough that their shoulders touched. He was still for a moment, and then he let out a long breath, and some tension she hadn't even realized he'd been carrying left his shoulders entirely. "I'm not going back to Coldbrook," she said. "No?" "No!" She paused. "I'm not any good at doing things halfway. If I stay, I stay. Properly. All of it." She looked at him sideways. "Is that something you've actually thought about? The complication of all of it?" "I've thought about nothing else for 5 weeks," he said. "The complication is—" A pause. "Not a deterrent." Valor's voice carried from somewhere down the corridor. The happy bell sound. Mirabelle's answering laugh. The light in the library was warm and gold. "Then I'll stay," she said. He reached over and took her hand the same way she had offered hers to him in the corridor 2 weeks ago. Beginning something, not ending it. "There's one more thing," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Draven told the pack you were exiled for being a disruption," he said. "That's the official record at Coldbrook. I'd like to correct it. The regional record should say what actually happened." He paused. "It should say that a healer with no pack support and no resources went into the cold alone and saved an infant who happened to be the Alpha King's son, refused to hand him to people who meant him harm, ran when she needed to run, and held him safe for 7 weeks using nothing but her own skill and her own courage." He looked at her. "That's what the record should say." Rowena was quiet for a moment. "That," she said, "is a very long record." "You earned every word of it." She looked down at their joined hands, at the life she had not expected to have and was now, quietly and definitely, choosing. "All right," she said. "You can keep the long version." Outside, the last light of the evening was doing its particular extraordinary thing in the courtyard. Valor's laugh rang down the corridor. The hall settled into its nighttime warmth. And Rowena Voss, who had spent 22 years being useful to people who didn't see her, sat in a library with a man who had been watching her carefully for 5 weeks and thinking about it for all of them, and let herself be, for the first time, exactly where she had chosen to be. It was not a small thing. It was, in fact, everything. Epilogue. 1 year later, spring came to the central hall the way it always did, slowly, and then all at once. Valor learned to walk in the courtyard, staggering between Rowena's hands and his mother's, with the determined expression of someone who considered falling to be a personal insult. He did not take it lying down, which Mirabel said was entirely his father's fault, and which Evander accepted without argument because it was completely true. He said his first word at 11 months. It was not, as Mirabel had hoped, "Mama." It was not, as Evander had quietly prepared himself for, "Da." It was a very clear and very deliberate version of Rowena's name, pointing at her from across the courtyard with focused, amber-eyed certainty. Rowena claimed this was coincidence. No one in the hall believed her. She had taken on a formal role as chief healer 6 months in, which gave her a staff of 12, a dedicated wing of the hall, and enough frustrating administrative paperwork to keep her occupied and complaining about it, which Evander had privately decided was one of his favorite sounds in the world. She had also, quietly and without making a production of it, written to Elder Leora at Coldbrook. Not to go back. Just to send 3 of her mother's healing journals, the ones she had decided Coldbrook's healers needed more than she did. Leora wrote back a letter that was 3 pages long and extremely apologetic. Rowena wrote back 2 sentences. "I know. It's done now." She meant it. On a morning in early spring, a year after the night she had followed a sound through the rain to a shed at the edge of a territory she no longer lived in, Evander found her in the library again, which was where most of the important things between them happened. He had a small box in his hand. Simple wood. No ceremony. "I was going to make a speech," he said. She looked up from her journal. "And?" she said. "And then I thought about how you feel about speeches." "I feel that they are usually longer than they need to be," she agreed. He crossed the room, sat beside her, and put the box on the table between them. She opened it. Inside was a ring. Simple. A clear gray stone set in plain silver. The same gray as his eyes, she noticed. Not a traditional bonding ring. Not a statement piece. Just a well-made, honest thing that looked like it had been chosen by someone who had thought carefully about what would suit her. She picked it up, turned it in the light. "You thought about this," she said. "For 4 months, he confirmed. "I started 3 different times and stopped because it didn't feel right yet. Then it felt right, and I kept finding reasons to wait, and Mirabel told me I was being a coward, which is accurate." Rowena smiled. "I like Mirabel. She's right about most things." She put the ring on her own finger and held her hand up to look at it. "I'm not going to be a traditional partner," she said. "I have opinions about pack governance that I will share whether they're asked for or not. I will argue with your counsel. I will always put the patients first. I am not going to spend my life being decorative." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on all of that." She looked at him. He looked back at her with that complete, clear, direct attention that she had decided was one of the most valuable things about him. The way he actually saw her, the way he had always seen her, from the first moment in a darkening clearing when he had stepped out of the trees and confirmed her name without making it a threat. "Then yes," she said, simple, certain. He exhaled. Something that had been held tight in him for a long time finally, fully, released. Outside, Vylor's voice rose in the courtyard, delighted and determined. Mirabelle's laugh followed. The spring air moved through the open library window, warm and green. And somewhere in the records of the Regional Wolf Council, filed under corrections and clarifications, was a document that told the true story of a healer from Coldbrook. The one who had gone out in the rain. The one who had chosen the harder, right thing every single time she'd been given the choice. The one who had held a baby safe through 7 long weeks and delivered him back to a father who had been quietly breaking apart without knowing how to say so. The pack threw her out for saving a baby. They didn't know it was the Alpha King's pup. They didn't know it would give her everything. The end. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If Rowena and Evander's story stayed with you, please subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps more people find these stories. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment was your favorite? I read every single one.